Welcome to the Diffuse Podcast with host Philip Grindell, CEO and founder of Diffuse, a global threat and intelligence consultancy that blends psychology and intelligence to mitigate threats and risks to prominent people and brands.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Diffuse Podcast. Now, we used to call it the Online Bodyguard, but we've rebranded to bring the podcast online with the wider Diffuse brand. That sounds a bit weird, that online, but anyway, it's now part of the wider kind of Diffuse brand, so it's no longer the Online Bodyguard, and it's part of Diffuse, where we take the guesswork out of protecting your security, reputation, and status. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce my friend Corina Goetz to this podcast. Corina is a Middle East strategist, and her business is called StarCat, which stands for 5-Star Service and Consulting and Training. And Corina and her team help professionals and companies to better understand the Gulf region so they can create success for their clients and themselves much quicker. And basically educating anyone to succeed in the Gulf region and break down all the stereotypes, which is what this podcast is going to be about. So just so we're clear, this is not about politics. We're not going to be discussing the rights and wrongs or whatever, anyone else's beliefs around what they think is right about the Middle East or the Gulf region or otherwise. This is, if you have strong views on it, that's fine. You don't do business there. But you might find that some of those views are actually wrong or mistaken or just sold by the media. So listen in, because I've absolutely guarantee we're all going to learn things on this podcast. So, Corina, welcome. Thank you for doing this. Great to see you. And let's just start off by saying, when we talk about the Gulf, what do we mean? What sort of, when we say the Gulf region, what does that actually mean?
Well, I think the Gulf region is defined as sort of 6 main states, and that's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. And they actually even have an official body called the Gulf Cooperation Council, which fosters cooperation between all of these 6. But when we talk about the Gulf, we mean these 6 countries.
Brilliant. Okay. So I'm fascinated. How did you become interested, engaged, involved, and learn about this part of the world?
Well, this is a very interesting story because I grew up in Germany, in particular, actually in East Germany, and I never really had any dealings with any kind of people from the Arab world up until I actually moved to London, because my background is in hospitality. So I worked with a lot of 5-star hotels. And then, of course, when I worked in Germany in some hotels, but even there, I had no exposure to any of the sort of Gulf clientele. But when I came to London, I suddenly had massive exposure. And when we look at this, I think we look at sort of like early 2000. And at that time, I mean, Facebook, I think, only launched like 2006, 2007. So there wasn't really much information. I mean, the internet was obviously around, but the information that was there was either wrong or not correct, or there just wasn't much. And then again, I think we also in Europe, also in America or in other parts, we don't normally get a lot of regional news. So we just get news that pertain to us. So again, there wasn't much about the Gulf. So everything that I kind of learned was by meeting people from the region, by dealing with them, by experiencing what they needed, by meeting some of their families, and then also traveling there. So I think my first trip to the region was in 2005, I believe. And obviously it was very different back then, but that really opened my eyes to this whole region and how this actually worked, because it's a very different thing when you work with clients over here in the UK than when you actually see how they live and what their life is like day to day. And that, I think, is also one of the beautiful things, that people let you in very quickly in the Gulf. And that's kind of how I started. And I think one other thing I would like to say is probably that on paper, I would have probably been the total opposite to what you would think would be a good fit to deal with clients from the Gulf. Because I'm German, I'm very organized, I'm very punctual. I have all my things sort of like all my ducks in a row, as they say. And but my personality actually really gelled with the Middle Eastern personality. We had a lot of values in common about families and things, and it just worked really well. And some of these relationships that I've had from 20 years ago. And this is kind of how I learned, by making all the mistakes and learning what people had to say and what was happening in their countries, and being open-minded.
So I think that brings us nicely into dispelling one particular myth, which, you talk about, you might not be the or people's perception of a good fit. And what you didn't mention was because you're a woman.
Yes. And if I want to say something to the woman in particular, I mean, time and time and time again, people have said to me, "Oh, you're a woman and you don't speak Arabic. Like, you can't deal with this kind of clientele." But it's actually the opposite, because if you're a woman, I can go and see the man and the woman. Because if you're a man, sometimes if the women are very traditional or the family is very traditional, you cannot go and see the woman. Whilst with me, I mean, I've been to Saudi, I've been to dinners where I was the only woman with 50 men, but it was fine. Everybody was very accommodating. So being a woman is actually a massive plus. And one of the other myths is also, you don't have to speak the language, because a lot of the people from there speak very good English. And certainly the new generation, I just met somebody that I've known for a long time from Abu Dhabi, and his son is the same age as mine. Like, his English is perfect because they really have, the Arabic and the English in school, and kids, they already, they grow up learning English. So English is really not a problem.
But I'm guessing that if in many cultures, if you know one or two key phrases, that always goes down well, I'm guessing.
Oh, of course. But you don't need to have a full, you don't need to be fluent.
Yeah. And interesting that the Arabic is, people often think, oh, Arabic is one language, which of course it is, but it's like every language, like English as an example, in terms of dialects and what have you. And so that the Arabic of the Middle East may be very different to the Arabic of North Africa, as an example.
Oh, very much so. Because, for example, Didi, who works with me, she grew up in Italy, but she can understand Arabic because some of her family is from Morocco. But she even said that with some of the accents in some of the countries, she said, I can totally understand really well when people from this country speak to me, whilst with the next one, I really struggle. I have to listen really carefully. And even then, I don't get the whole gist sometimes. So it has a lot of regional dialects, and you have to, I think almost with English, there's, the Scottish, that is very different. So just because you speak English doesn't mean you understand somebody who speaks maybe full-blown Scottish.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so if we look at it from a business perspective, why should we look to the Gulf region to do business? What's the attraction?
I think the attraction at the moment is that they are obviously very forward thinking in what they want to achieve for the region and make that whole region such a hub. I think we've seen what they can achieve with what Dubai has done over the past sort of 20 years. And now I think it's almost like, I would almost say it's sort of like you're awakening a giant when you talk about Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia, up until, I'd say probably 2017, 2018, was quite a closed country. It was very difficult to get a visa. Tourist visas weren't a thing, except obviously for religious tourism. But, and my first trip to Saudi was actually in 2011. And my God, I had to get somebody to sponsor me. They then had to send us to the Minister of Interior, who had to approve this in Saudi. Then I had to go to Saudi embassy. I mean, the whole process took like 4 weeks, easy. And it was not guaranteed that you would get it. I did get it in the end, but it was quite a long process. And for every single trip, you had to do the same thing. When you now look fast forward to 2023, you go online and you get your visa within like 3 minutes. So it's a whole different thing. And I think what's so interesting about Saudi is that they have so many areas that are very unexplored for the majority of people. And that's something that they're focusing on. Like, now there's a big push for tourism, and people will think, why would I go to Saudi? There's probably just desert there. But there isn't. And this is the funny thing, that they actually have so much to offer. They have mountains, they have snow, they have, a coastline on the Red Sea that is literally has never been developed for tourism at all. And that will, once these projects have come to completion, I think will sort of rival the Maldives, because also they have, the animal and the plantation and the coral reefs and everything is still intact, and it hasn't been spoiled by tourism over years and years and years. And what they're doing now is obviously also plan ahead for this to try and preserve that and not make the same mistakes that maybe other places have made, where these areas, almost got damaged by some of the tourism. And then you have places like Al Ula that, if I would want to compare it to, is probably very similar what you can see in Petra, although they don't like to be compared. But that's the kind of landscape. So there is a huge amount of different things that you can do. And people just think, oh my God, no, I would never go there. But that's because people don't know. And the funny thing is, with places, for example, like Al Ula, I have Saudi friends that said, I've grown up in this country and I even never knew this existed. So I think there's a lot of things that are there that people just don't know about. And I think that is just hugely exciting. And some of the projects that they have is, they tie in with all the things that a lot of the other countries in the West want to do, sustainability and looking ahead and coming up with cutting edge technologies. So that's why I think it's a real hub of innovation, and these projects move fast. I mean, there's a new announcement pretty much every other week. So it's definitely a region that we should keep on our radar.
And, in terms of then developing business relationships or beginning to sort of reach out into that part of the world, how do you do that? I mean, is it LinkedIn? Is it what's the kind of the way that you engage with that part of the world?
One of the things that I always say is you have to build relationships, because relationships in the Middle East are more important than anywhere else in the world. And when I say relationships, I mean, it's not just about you go in, you pitch for your project, and that's the end of the communication. No. You have to keep building these relationships and stay in touch with people. And even once your project is finished, because this is the other beauty of the Middle East, because you never know who else these people know. And in the Middle East, everything is about recommendation. Everything is about, if you have done good business with somebody, they will recommend you, but they will only recommend you if they feel you have a genuine interest in them. And if you just think, okay, I'm going to do my project and then I'm going to leave it, that's just not going to work. But back to your question, where if, for example, you had no connections at all in the region, definitely LinkedIn is a really good place to get started, because Saudi is very, very active on LinkedIn. And people would say, oh no, I don't believe this. And I'm like, you guys just need to check. All the big projects are on there. There's so many people on there. And it's actually so funny, because we're planning a trip to Saudi, and I was looking for a tour guide, and somebody in my connections turned out to be a tour guide, and we just chatted, and he has these brilliant offers, and I'm like, oh my God, I would have never known where to find you, because if you look on some of the other places where you can book tours, it's not that common. And how are you really going to be sure that it's the right person? But this person actually had built up a profile on LinkedIn. They talked about some of the trips, and it was brilliant. So I highly recommend. And, I should also say, we were at a conference probably about 2 months ago. And one of the Saudi ministers at the conference said, we always get asked, oh, how can we get started? How can people reach out to us? And he said, guys, it's not rocket science. We're all on LinkedIn. So just make it happen. So there you go. This is my pitch for LinkedIn.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I excuse me, I've had Saudi clients, and I've had members of the Saudi royal family. But of course, the Saudi royal family is huge. And I've had others that have kind of purported to be princes and what have you. But it can be slightly daunting when you're dealing with such a huge family where lots of people claim they are related or associated with. Where do you start? How do you know if someone is genuine or not?
I think this is where, if you really want to make this a focus of growth, I think this is where you need to take time to educate yourself and invest a little bit into learning what the region is about. And it's exactly like you said, for somebody that is really new and on LinkedIn. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of time somebody tried to connect with me claiming to be the Crown Prince of Dubai. Now, if I didn't know any better, I probably would have been like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Whereas probably you and me would be like, hold on a minute, let's look at this profile. You have how many followers? And aside from that, you're the Crown Prince of Dubai. You have an office full of people looking after your social media. It's not necessarily just going to be you. So it was very clear that this person was a spammer, but a lot of people wouldn't know that. And that's why I think, like I think with anything in the world, if you're not an expert, I think you need to seek somebody out that has some expertise and can help you and guide you and answer these exact questions if you're not sure. I mean, I had a friend who reached out from LA who looks after some celebrities, and they had been sent a letter from supposedly Abu Dhabi, one of the palaces, to invite one of the celebrities he was managing. And it was very clear very quickly for me by looking at this letter that this was a complete scam. And but he wouldn't have known because it looked legitimate to him. So there we go. I'm sure you have come across so many more of these kind of examples.
I've had exactly that example where I've had a crown prince or a person who purported to be the chief advisor to one of the crown princes reaching out to me. And I remember thinking, would that person really be the person that's reaching out to me? Kind of on a cold reach out. And I just thought, no. And you do 5 minutes of fairly basic research and you can pretty quickly work out that's not who they say they are. And even if you look at the email addresses and all, the usual sort of thing of scams. But equally, I've had others who've contacted me who were very genuine and again, 5 minutes and you think, yeah. And I remember very distinctly when I had my first sort of Saudi client and looking them up and researching and thinking, wow, they really are part of the royal family and they're actually fairly close. But the interesting thing was when I met them, they couldn't have been, I would know if you'd walked down the street, you'd never have known who they were. And they couldn't have been more laid back. And I met them in London. They live in London, or certainly part of the year. But they weren't at all my perspective or my perception of what I was going to experience. And so that was again, another gentle reminder about what your perceptions are and not always accurate around what people are like. But it's interesting in terms of people perhaps thinking that the Gulf is purely about oil, as an example. And yet we know that tourism is obviously huge now.
Tourism, I think, innovation. I think that there's so many stereotypes that I hear all the time. It's the same as that people think everybody from the Gulf is rich. And that's not true either. Yes, of course, maybe they're a bit more wealthy in our eyes, but they're not like that top level to the same degree that people have said to me before when I had a Saudi client and he wanted some help with something. And people over here in England have said to me, well, do they speak English? Like, yes, they do. So there's a lot of, I think, preconceived notion. I see this time and time again, and that I think for me is also one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of company or people from Europe make. They go out there and then they think, oh, we have to bring in and show them how to do it. Yes, maybe in your specific field, but you also have a duty to educate yourself about what is important to them and what they want to achieve, actually. And a lot of the trends and some of the tech stuff that is trending, they probably know before you, because social media is huge in the Middle East. And people never believe me when I say that. But, I looked at some statistics and it basically said for Saudi Arabia, the population is 35 million. 30 million of these, of the population is on the internet and 30 million use WhatsApp. So that just kind of shows you how advanced this region really is. And they see all of these things. I mean, some of my friends from the regions, they say to me, oh, we saw this new supplement or this new beauty brand or this new restaurant in London I hadn't even heard of. So, they're really ahead with a lot of it. So I think we should never underestimate that.
So if we talk about the Gulf region generally, I mean, it's probably, if we say the Gulf region, it's probably like saying, if I was to say as an example, is it safe to go to the Gulf region? That's like saying, is it safe to go to Europe? Because they're all independent places and they all have their own cultures and various different issues that are going on as we do in Europe. But are there some sort of general guidance or good practices across the region?
I mean, for sure. I think back to your question, is it safe to go to the Gulf region? I would actually say across these 6 countries that we mentioned, it's actually very safe. And it always puzzles me that many people just feel really apprehensive and they think it's not safe at all. And then they go and they see that you can leave your laptop, your phone in a coffee shop, in a restaurant, and it will still be there an hour later. And they're like, oh my God, how did this happen? And this is a very common theme that people just don't know. So yes, it's very safe. But of course, for me, I would always say, respect the locals, do some of your homework, do some research. So for example, if you go to, let's say, let's maybe even go away from Saudi Arabia and just look at UAE. So a lot of people will go to Dubai. Dubai, I think, is not very representative of the region because it's such a massive expat city now. And it's obviously very free and in the way you can dress pretty much how you like. And this was not even the same a few years ago. A few years ago, you would say, at least cover your shoulders, and wear like loose fitting dresses. If you go to Dubai more now, there's crop tops and mini skirts, you see anything. But let's say you're there and then you think, okay, maybe I'll just go to Abu Dhabi. And because there's a few things to see. One of them, for example, is the mosque. And on our last trip, we also went to the mosque. And it was so interesting what the perception of people was walking into that mosque. Mini skirts, hot pants, which is clearly not appropriate. And they all had to go back and buy extra things to cover up. And so I think for me, this is just good practice. You wouldn't go in like a mini skirt into a church in Italy or in anywhere else. So I would say those are the kind of things you need to look into. And then I would say be open-minded, because people are very friendly and they want to strike up a conversation. And it doesn't matter if you know them or you don't know them. People really want to help. And that's, I think to me, that's just beautiful. So I would say do your research and look at the different places, because not one place is like the other. And I would imagine most people will probably go to Dubai, and that's probably fine. But there's still things that are not acceptable in Dubai, like things like, I don't know, getting drunk on the beach or, things like that. That's just not okay. And for those kind of things, you can get arrested. So do your research.
So I think my perspective on some of that is it's about respecting other people's cultures. You may
100%.
You may think, or not you, but a person may think, well, this is how I dress, so I should be allowed to go into, a mosque or something. But actually, it's about respecting. You're in their country, you're in their culture, so you either respect it or just don't go. And I think it's less about culture, although that exists, but it is mainly about respect. Know the rules. I know we always hear horror stories, don't we, of someone being imprisoned for something that is apparently minor, but we don't get all the full facts or something. But actually, when we look down at it, it's about, there are clear rules. They're not hiding behind anything. They may be different to ours. They may have some specific religious and cultural rules, because that's the part of the world you're operating in. And so you need to be aware of them. And if you don't know, ask somebody. But it's just about respect and understanding. And you've got a brilliant page on your website, which I mentioned earlier on, which you've called the risks in the Gulf state. And I don't think it means risks as in danger, but I think it means challenge, issues and challenges. And I thought if we just talked about some of those, because I think I'd highly recommend anyone to go to your site, and we'll put the details on the podcast notes. But there's some really quick, easy wins here in terms of some of the issues. And so, you talk about gender roles, for instance. Again, perceptions. Yes. So talk to me about that, about the gender roles and our perceptions.
So I think the perception is very much like, and I've seen this time and time again, that, people think your women don't really have a real say on it, but there's actually a lot of the experiences that I had and a lot of the people that I have met is the woman actually behind the scenes pull very much the strings. There's a lot of woman entrepreneurs in the Gulf now, and I have a post about that coming up as well. And they very much encouraged to get their education, do something with business, but it may just not work in the way that we see entrepreneurs. So, for example, I have a friend in Qatar, and one of her family members, one of her cousins, she actually has a really beautiful beauty business. And we were talking about this last time. And she's really grown this from really small to much bigger. And she has a lot of people following her now. And she said to me, I love that. My family is so encouraging. But one of the things I could do is advertise that as myself, because it's just not, this is just not in our nature. We're very private, and I just will not show my face on social media. So I always look for models that represent and everything. So again, somebody from here would say, oh my God, this is just terrible. But that's just their culture. And why not respect that? But that doesn't mean, she would want to do that, because she was like, no, I would never want to do that. But I love my business and I really want to drive this forward. And it's making such an impact with women, because the makeup's really helping people. And I'm looking at different skin tones that they have to, for example, to Europe. So to me, that's just beautiful. And why can't we celebrate that? Not everybody has to be the same. Not everybody in Europe is the same. So I think it's just looking at those kind of things. So it's not like that the man oppressed the woman. Actually, a lot of the men are very, they encourage a lot of their women to, do something or come up with a business or come up with an idea. And then again, I had a friend in Abu Dhabi, and she said, I really wanted to bring you a little gift, but I wanted to bring you something local. So she brought me like a little notebook and pens and things that were actually made in Abu Dhabi by local Emirati women, because some of it was to do with the craft and the way they had sort of like folded certain and used certain techniques. And I just thought that was just such a beautiful thing. So it's really great, I think, to see that. And then I think one of the other examples I always give, people say, but in Saudi, it's dreadful. Women can't do anything. And then I'll always say, when you look at, every country obviously has an ambassador in different countries to represent the country. And the number one diplomatic posting is, of course, the US, which is Washington, because it's the most important for various of reasons. And guess what? The Saudi ambassador to Washington is a lady, Princess Rima, and she's been in this post since 2019. So, it's kind of like, it's always what you choose to look at, I think, and how you choose to interpret that to your own values. But I think if you're a little bit open-minded and you look a bit more outside, you will actually see there's a lot going on that, is very beautiful.
And of course, a lot of it's media perceptions and what the media tell us. And, we watch some of the TV shows around Dubai as an example, or the UAE, and we see extreme wealth. But that doesn't reflect the whole place. It's just a microcosm of what they're showing us. But that's just the way it is, isn't it? And I'm sure they think the same about us. So then the next title you've got is greetings and gestures. So tell us about that. What do we need to know about that?
So greetings, for example, one of the things that I always give as an example, because this is such a good example, is, here in Europe, we always say, oh, how's your wife? And because we just want to find out how's, the significant other. But in the Middle East, you don't say that. In the Middle East, and especially if you're talking men to men, this can actually be really offensive, asking after somebody else's wife. So your get out clause there is, how's the family? Because that incorporates everything and anything, and it doesn't refer to one particular person. I mean, in Europe, we wouldn't think anything of it, but in the Middle East, this is a big thing. Mm. So, and then of course, you can go a lot further with things like handshakes. If people are very conservative, for example, and you're a man, maybe if you meet the rest of the family, maybe the wife doesn't want to shake hands, which is just totally appropriate because that's just not as per their culture. So you kind of also have to always take clues from the opposite side. So I think there's like lots and lots of little nuances of things, if then you can just operate so much better and you can be so much more confident.
It's really interesting. I was very new to Middle Eastern clients or golf clients, and I had a golf client, and I was in exactly that scenario where my head was full of perceptions and what have you. And when I met the contact who was the working for the family, I actually said to him, "What do I do? Do I reach out and shake the hands, and do I, and he kind of guided me through it and said, right, this is how they like to do things, what have you." And I just thought, why would you not just ask? It's not offensive to ask. I'm new to your culture. What do I do? How do I behave? Because I've been in other cultures around the world, in Africa and in Far East, etc., where I've done exactly the same. And so again, I guess it's about not making assumptions and not being offended by different rules or judging people by different rules. And if you're not sure, ask.
Yeah, 100%. I would agree. Like, do your homework beforehand or ask the question. And I think people will never be offended if you ask a question and say, I'm sorry, but I don't know.
Yeah.
They will actually be really happy because people there are very happy to show you their country, their customs. So, but I mean, of course, in a business setting, it probably pays off if you do a bit of homework beforehand. You don't want to sit in a business meeting and be asking all these questions. I think you should be better prepared.
Yeah, which brings us on to dress code. So we mentioned obviously going to a mosque and visiting a mosque and the appropriateness of dress there. But what about business? Are they very formal? Are they quite relaxed? What's the advice there?
I mean, I think if you go into a business meeting and this is about meeting a new partner or I mean, in any kind of business setting, you should be dressed in a business way. And it's very interesting because I heard this time and time again that people look how well you are actually dressed. And as a Westerner, your counterpart is, when you go to the Middle East, 100% dressed in their local dress code. So the man, wear the white thobe, and this is very normal because that is their setting in their home countries. It wouldn't be necessarily in Europe, but over there it is. But if you go in a nice suit, in some nice shoes, then that shows your counterpart you mean business. And as a woman, I would say, this is what I always say, you should also be dressed in business attire, but you should make sure that you're not going in a mini dress. So if you had a dress, I would say, maybe if you had like a longer dress that you could put a jacket on, or like a longer skirt, something that is a bit more free flowing and not as tight. Also, you should stay away from, showing a lot of décolleté and things like that. In doubt, I would always put a jacket on. And so you just look well dressed and not, I don't know, what is the right word for this? It's maybe a bit more conservative than what you would dress in Europe, I would say. And then in Saudi, I always get asked this question: do I need to wear an abaya, or do I have to? You used to, but you don't need it anymore. But you can if you want to. And again, that's kind of like a beautiful thing. Like for me, I just think, oh, this is brilliant. I'll just take my abaya along, because it's actually a very versatile garment.
So what is an abaya?
And so an abaya is almost like a very long flowing, I would say, almost like an overcoat. Like it covers your arms up to your hands, and it normally goes all the way down to the floor. You can close it or you can keep it open, but it's a brilliant garment because they have very light fabrics to throw over. For example, if you had a t-shirt on and some summer trousers and you put the abaya over it, you'll always be fine, like dressed well.
So that's a ladies,
so for me,
and that's a ladies item.
That's the ladies, not for men.
Sure.
For men, you can totally go in a nice suit in a business setting. So it's
And would you be?
I think.
Would you be expected to wear a tie?
I would say if you're pitching for something, yes, I would.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, maybe if you're just meeting somebody more like as a first instant for a coffee, then maybe not so much. But if it's a business meeting or you're presenting something, 100%, you should make an effort.
So really, it's kind of formal and conservative is from a business perspective.
Yeah, I think just showing people that you mean business.
And again, respect.
I mean, like over here, I think in Europe, you wouldn't turn up, sloppy if you go for a business meeting. So
yeah. I mean, it comes down to respect here, doesn't it? In terms of understanding where you are in the world, what's right and wrong, and respecting their cultures and the nuances. So the next one that fascinates me is time management.
Ooh, this is a good one. So time management is, I mean, it has so many facets to it. I think it starts from like when you plan your trip to see if there's any holidays coming up, and they may not even be obvious. So again, this is already one thing. Then is a time when people are away. So for example, in the summer, lots of people go away. There's not going to be prime time for your business, but then also I would say, if you go for meetings and, the German in me would like to have, a meeting at 10, a meeting at 11, meeting at 12. This doesn't work in the Middle East, because your 10 o'clock meeting may be really great. And the person will say, oh my God, I just have the right opportunity for you. My cousin has this company or this and this, and I should introduce you to him, and let's go now. And then what are you going to do with all your other meetings? So you need to leave yourself a little bit of breathing room, because things sometimes move very fast, and you have to sometimes change your calendar in order to accommodate other people or use these kind of opportunities. So I would say, you need to be a little bit more fluid. And I understand this is really hard to understand for a lot of people. And also, I think if you work, like, let's say in a corporate setting, very often, if you go on a business trip, I think your boss may want to see, okay, what are you actually doing? Who are you actually seeing? And this may be a little bit more tricky in the Middle East to quantify. So that's why I think timing, and there's so many facets to it, is such a crucial thing. So you need to be aware of this, because otherwise you're going to get caught out.
So punctuality is a different element to timing in terms of, I'm a bit like you. I'm kind of, 10 o'clock is 5 to 10 for me. So that may not correspond with their lifestyle.
No, it may be a little bit later because something else had come up. Somebody had to take a phone call. So punctuality, can be a fluid concept. But then also, again, I think if you look at some of the cities, for example, Riyadh, the traffic can be crazy. So sometimes you could just purely, where people tell you maybe the day before, it's going to take you 10 minutes. And then the next day, you just end up being in this massive traffic jam, and you're stuck there for half an hour. So I think, you need to kind of balance that a bit better with the timing. But again, likewise, nobody, I think, will tell you off if you're there 10, 15 minutes late. It's not like the Germans would be like, we're out of here,
Yeah, you've had your chance, you missed it. So you mentioned here also about meetings and how the culture of a meeting might be different in terms of interruptions.
Yes, I think there's there's a lot of things here with interruptions. People may look at their phone. People may need to go and pray because they pray 5 times a day, and then maybe they'll leave you for 10 minutes, and people will think, "Oh my God, the person just walked out. What happened?" But it just, maybe they just wanted to go and pray, and then they come back in 10 minutes. So I think there's a lot more things, but then it's also knowing about, for example, that you get Arabic coffee. And if you have, let's say, 5 business meetings in a day, every meeting you're going to get Arabic coffee. So you need to pace yourself, because otherwise by the end of the day, you won't be able to sleep. So it's little nuances like that, to know, but then at the same time, it's also rude to not accept it. So it's all of these kind of things. And that's, I think, when it's so useful, if you have somebody that can give you a little bit of the heads up and say, "Oh my God, pace yourself with this. Don't do this." Or it's the same, like you go to a dinner and, some of us have been brought up to, we need to clear our plate. Well, in the Middle East, that's not a good idea, because you're just going to end up getting more. So it's, but this is part of their hospitality. And again, it's different. And if you don't know, you're just going to end up in a situation where you think, "Oh my God, what is happening here?"
Yeah, I had an experience exactly like that when I had occasion to be with some Bedouins. And unbeknown to me, when they poured you coffee, when you'd had enough coffee, you had to turn your cup upside down. Otherwise, they'd just keep pouring coffee, because they just assumed that you would want more coffee. And after about 4 cups of, lovely cardamom coffee and what have you, actually they said to me, "Have you had enough?" And I said, "Oh God, yeah." And they said, "Oh, you need to turn your cup upside down." So again, otherwise I'd probably never slept the rest of my life. But on that note, let's touch on a subject which often raises lots of questions: alcohol. What's your experience of that in terms of, is it completely something you should never go near? Is it something you can drink in hotel? What's the kind of ruling generally around alcohol?
I think in a lot of countries you can get alcohol. Obviously in, like in Dubai, you can get it in like restaurants, in hotels, lots of different places. In Qatar, I think you can get it in hotels, although there's quite a few hotels that are also dry. In Saudi, you can't get it in a public place, but in a private place, probably. However, you have to be, as for example, like as an expat, sometimes you have to be careful, because, there's also people that are brewing this, I'd say, like underground, which is a lot stronger. So I would say, in a place where this is not accepted, for now in Saudi, stay away from it, because you just don't know, I mean, of course, like in any place, you can get anything, but if you don't know what you're getting, I think you're going to put yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in.
And would I be right then thinking, if you were drinking in the hotel, as an example, alcohol in the hotel, and you go off to a meeting the next morning or something, if you've got alcohol in your breath, for instance, that might be offensive, or that might not be particularly not accepted.
A good look,
yeah,
sure. No. But then on the other side, I've gone to dinner with people in the Emirates, with locals, where they wanted to take you to dinner. And they would say, "But please do order some wine if you want to." They wouldn't drink any, but they would be quite happy for you to have some. But then again, for me, would you want to? Okay, maybe if they insisted, maybe half a glass, but I wouldn't, even if you drink a few more normally in England, I kind of would try and, sort of minimize it, because it's just not a good look. And if your host is not drinking, it's just
that kind of just seems like common sense, isn't it? Really.
Well, you would think, but it doesn't always happen this.
Common sense, a bit of respect for wherever you are in the world. I've been in other parts of the world, not the Middle East, other parts in the world where that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do, or and so you just kind of tag along with what they're doing, really. But I suppose if you really can't do without a drink, then just don't go. In Dubai, and if you can get alcohol at the hotels,
then like there's nothing wrong with having a drink.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think you need to really look at what you have going on the next day and how this is going to look.
And Dubai is very different to Saudi. So, it's about where you are in the world as well in terms of, as I said, rather
100%.
than sort of throwing the whole Gulf as one place, clearly Dubai and Saudi have possibly different extremes in terms of the liberalism or conservatism that they currently enjoy. So it's horses for courses, as the phrase goes.
Yeah.
So kind of summing up, really, you're obviously a huge advocate of business in the Middle East, breaking down the barriers. What would, if you had sort of 5 top tips, what would they be to in terms of engaging with and working with Middle Eastern clients or Gulf clients?
I think I would say be open-minded. Be open-minded that lots of different things can happen and you sometimes can just go with it. Then I would also say never assume anything. So never assume that you are the only person who knows everything, because like I said before, people do know a lot more things, and you will just look silly if you're pretending to come from this sort of, higher level, and it's not really what people like. I would say do some research, or so research in the sense of you would do research if you go to any country on a holiday or something to just see, how do you get around? What do you do? Those kind of things. But in a business setting, I would say do your homework, especially if the deal or the project or whatever you're working on is very important. I would say, maybe go that one step further and hire somebody who can give you that help. Because also I find, a lot of times when people Google stuff, there's very conflicting information. Like, how do you know that this is the right kind of information? So I would go to somebody who is maybe has their finger on the pulse a little bit more, because it definitely pays off, in my opinion. Oh my God, what is this, 4? So what is the 5th? I would say just enjoy the hospitality, because it's actually really beautiful. And people are really open and they want to show you their culture, maybe do something that you would never do, because it's very common in the Middle East that people invite you to their home and they invite you for a meal. And we in Europe think, oh my God, I would never do this, but over there, this is like a common hospitality. And I would say it's a brilliant experience. So if you get to do that, or if you work out there and you have a local colleague and they invite you, make use of that opportunity, because it will really broaden your horizon, I think.
So following on from that, then the question that jumps to my mind then is, okay, so you're invited to dinner at a client's house. Here in the UK, we would probably take a bottle of wine with us. What would you take if you're invited to? I mean, would you be expected to take anything? But what would, if you were, what would you take? What's the sort of a gift that you might take to dinner?
I think it's not something that it has to be massive, but you could buy a box of chocolate, you could buy a box of dates or something like that, that is easily found. I would definitely take something, but even if you go to somebody that is very wealthy, it's not about how much you take, it's just that you take something. I mean, obviously, if you know the person very well, that's a different thing, so then you can tailor it accordingly. I mean, we met somebody in Qatar, for example, who just had a baby, which we knew about. So we brought a little gift for the baby, and that was fine. But that was a very different thing, because we obviously knew a lot more about the people. But if you don't know much, just bring anything, and you can get chocolates and dates anywhere you go, really, in the Gulf, just as long as you bring something to say thank you.
And Corina, if people want to engage with you and obviously find out more about the Middle East and the Gulf, or engage your services because they've got business contracts coming up, where do they find you?
So I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Corina Goetz. And then obviously, I think you're going to leave the website on the bottom, which is star-cat.co.uk, and it has lots of interesting information. If you could sign up, for example, to our newsletter. We do a newsletter every Sunday. We talk about a different topic about the Middle East. Something that is, so for example, in September, we're going to talk about Saudi National Day because that's coming up there. What is this? And previously we talked about like Ramadan and Eid and what does that mean? And what does that look like? And so there's lots of interesting information. Then we also do, on LinkedIn, I talk a lot about what are the big projects, what are things going on out there. So there's, if you don't know much about the region, but you have an interest, I think there's a good starting point.
Yeah, I've gone on your website and it's really informative actually, and it's there's lots of bits on there that you can link onto or get the post and learn things in 5 minutes. This document I've got, the risks in the Gulf state, I think is excellent, frankly, and it's 2-minute read, but it's something you could pop in your traveling bag and take with you, frankly, But brilliant. I will put all of those details on the podcast notes and when we publish it on social media. It's been a huge pleasure talking to you, Corina, and love learning more about the Middle East and the Gulf region particularly. I'd encourage everyone to who's got any involvement or wants any involvement to engage with Corina, because I've known Corina for a couple of years now, and she's my kind of real expert and go-to person on this subject. So once again, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Diffuse podcast with host Philip Grindell, CEO and founder of Diffuse. Please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platforms.